In the desolate frontier of 1880s New Mexico territory, a journey of reinvention becomes a desperate struggle for survival. When Lillian Crawford stepped off the dusty stagecoach in Blackwater Gulch, she arrived with a carefully crafted past and letters promising marriage to a successful mine owner. Instead, she found an abandoned town with empty buildings, secrets darker than her own, and a mysterious gunslinger whose haunted eyes seemed to recognize the truth she'd fled 1,000 miles to escape. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stagecoach lurched violently as it hit another deep rut in the trail, sending Lillian Crawford sliding across the leather seat. She clutched her small leatherbound journal tighter against her chest and braced herself against the wooden frame of the window. The desert passes of New Mexico territory were proving more treacherous than anything she had experienced during her long journey from Philadelphia. First time out west? The elderly woman sitting across from her smiled kindly, her weathered face a map of fine lines that deepened around her eyes. Is it that obvious? Lillian adjusted her hat, which had become askew during the rough passage. Most newcomers don't realize they ought to wear clothes that won't show all the dust, the woman replied, nodding at Lillian's slate-gray traveling dress, once pristine when she'd boarded the train in Philadelphia 3 weeks ago. Now it was coated with a fine layer of reddish-brown dust, the hem frayed and dirty. Lillian sighed. I suppose I have a great deal to learn about frontier life. In truth, she had given little thought to such practical matters when she'd packed her trunks. Her mind had been filled with urgent necessity, the need to disappear completely from her old life. Mr. James Blackwood's advertisement seeking a bride had seemed like providence. His letters described a thriving mining town called Blackwater Gulch, where he owned the successful Redemption mine and a handsome 2-story house on the town's main street. At 26 years old, Lillian had been desperate for escape, not romance. The scandal in Philadelphia had left her with few options beyond accepting Blackwood's proposal. His letters had been businesslike but kind, describing a man who valued companionship and respectability over passion, precisely what Lillian needed. Blackwater Gulch, next stop, the driver called down. Last chance to stretch your legs before Tucson. Lillian's heart quickened, though not with anticipation. After weeks of travel, constantly looking over her shoulder, she might finally have reached sanctuary. She smoothed her dress as best she could and checked that her honey-blonde hair was still somewhat presentable under her hat. You've got business in Blackwater? The elderly woman asked, curiosity evident in her voice. I'm to be married, Lillian replied, the lie coming easier with each telling. My fiancé owns the Redemption mine. A strange expression crossed the woman's face. The Redemption, you say? Before Lillian could inquire about her reaction, the stagecoach came to a stop in a cloud of dust, and the driver opened the door. Blackwater Gulch, ma'am. Watch your step now. The elderly woman leaned forward and whispered urgently, Be careful, dear. Things aren't always what they seem out here. Unsettled by the warning, Lillian accepted the driver's hand and stepped down onto what appeared to be the main street of Blackwater Gulch. Her stomach tightened as she took in her surroundings. A single dirt road stretched before her, lined with wooden buildings. A general store, a saloon, what appeared to be a small bank, and various other businesses. But something was terribly wrong. The windows were dusty or boarded up. No horses stood hitched at any of the posts. No people moved along the boardwalks. Blackwater Gulch was empty. There must be some mistake, Lillian said, turning back to the driver who was already unloading her trunk. This can't be Blackwater Gulch. This is it, ma'am, he confirmed, dropping her trunk onto the dusty ground. Though I reckon it's seen better days. But where is everyone? Lillian asked, her voice rising with the first edges of panic. Where's the mine? Where's Mr. Blackwood? The driver shrugged. Don't rightly know, ma'am. Town was busy enough 6 months ago when I came through last. Silver was flowing, people everywhere. Something must have happened. You can't just leave me here, Lillian protested as the driver climbed back onto his seat. Got a schedule to keep, ma'am. Stagecoach company doesn't pay me to investigate ghost towns. He seemed to take pity on her stricken expression and added, Look, I come back through in 3 days on my return route. If things don't improve, you can ride back with me to Santa Fe. Before Lillian could argue further, he flicked the reins, and the stagecoach pulled away, leaving her alone with her trunk in the middle of the deserted street. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. She had spent nearly every penny she had on this journey. She couldn't return to Philadelphia, not after what had happened, and now she stood abandoned in a ghost town with no sign of her intended husband. She forced herself to breathe deeply. Panic wouldn't help. She needed to assess her situation. Logically, if this truly was Blackwater Gulch, then the redemption mine must be nearby. Perhaps the town was abandoned, but the mine still operational. Perhaps Blackwood was at the mine and simply hadn't received word of her arrival date. Lillian looked up and down the silent street. She needed information, and that meant exploring the town. She dragged her trunk to the boardwalk, then made her way to the building marked General Store. The door creaked ominously as she pushed it open. Inside, shelves stood partially stocked with goods now covered in a layer of dust. The counter was bare, except for a brass bell and a ledger book. It appeared the proprietor had left in a hurry, taking only the most valuable items. "Hello?" Lillian called. Her voice echoed in the empty space. "Is anyone here?" Only silence. Answered. Moving to the ledger, she flipped through its pages. The last entry was dated 4 months ago. Something had happened to empty this town in the early spring, and whatever it was, had happened quickly. A faint noise from outside, the first sound other than her own movements since the stagecoach departed, caught her attention. She moved cautiously to the window and peered out. A lone rider was making his way slowly down the main street. He sat tall in the saddle of a midnight black stallion, his posture speaking of quiet vigilance. He wore a long duster coat despite the heat, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, and she could see the glint of guns at his hips. Lillian instinctively stepped back from the window, heart pounding. She was alone in an abandoned town, and now a heavily armed stranger had appeared. She glanced around frantically for a weapon, grabbing a heavy iron paperweight from the counter. The sound of boots on the boardwalk approached the store. The door swung open, and the stranger filled the frame, backlit by the bright afternoon sun. For a moment, he simply stood there, as if assessing the situation. Then he stepped inside, moving with a controlled grace that spoke of dangerous capability. Up close, she could see he was tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered by sun and wind. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, and a thin scar ran along his left cheekbone. But it was his eyes that froze her in place. Pale blue, and startlingly intense, they seemed to look straight through her carefully constructed facade. Lillian clutched the paperweight tighter. "Who are you? What happened to this town?" The stranger studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep and raspy, as if rarely used. "I might ask you the same question, ma'am. Not many people come to Blackwater these days, especially not Eastern ladies, traveling alone." His gaze moved to the small derringer partially visible in her reticule, then back to her face. Something in his eyes changed, a flicker of recognition that sent ice through Lillian's veins. "I'm looking for James Blackwood," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I was to meet him here." The stranger's expression darkened. "Blackwood's gone. Everyone's gone. Just the ghosts left now." "Gone where? What happened?" "The Mine dried up. Or that's what they said. His eyes narrowed slightly. You're the mail-order bride. He mentioned you were coming. Hope flared briefly. You know Mr. Blackwood? Where is he? When will he return? The stranger moved further, into the store, each step deliberate. He won't be returning, ma'am. James Blackwood died 3 months ago. The words struck Lillian like a physical blow. Her last hope, her carefully orchestrated escape route, had vanished. That can't be right. I received a letter from him just before I departed Philadelphia. He was expecting me. Didn't say he died natural. Said he died. The stranger's hand moved casually to rest near one of his holstered revolvers. Strange time to be arriving as his bride when the man's been dead a quarter year. The implication was clear. He suspected something about her arrival. Lillian's mind raced. She needed to establish her legitimacy quickly. I had no way of knowing. The letters take weeks to travel. I sold everything I owned to make this journey. She opened her reticule and withdrew a bundle of letters tied with string. Here, his correspondence. Our arrangement was completely proper. The stranger made no move to take the letters. Instead, his gaze traveled over her face again, lingering on her eyes, as if searching for something. "What's your name?" he asked finally. Lillian Crawford. The name she'd adopted still felt foreign on her tongue. "Well, Miss Crawford, you've come a long way for nothing. This town's dead. No husband waiting, no mine producing silver." He glanced at her trunk. "Stage comes back through in 3 days. Until then, you can stay at the hotel. It's abandoned like everything else, but the roof don't leak." A sudden gust of wind rattled the door, sending swirls of dust across the floor. The stranger turned his head sharply toward the sound, hand tightening on his revolver, the reaction of a man who lived expecting danger. "Who are you?" Lillian asked again. "You never said." He considered her for a long moment before answering. "People who know me call me Rook." "Just Rook? No surname?" "Just Rook is plenty." His eyes narrowed again. "And what do people who know you call you, Miss Crawford? Your real name, I mean." The question struck fear into Lillian's heart. How could he possibly suspect? She'd been careful, meticulous in creating her new identity. No one in Philadelphia knew where she had gone. No one could have followed her. "I don't know what you mean," she said, striving for indignation rather than panic. "Lillian Crawford is my name." Rook's expression remained impassive, but something in his eyes told her he wasn't convinced. "Well then, Miss Crawford from Philadelphia, you'd best collect your things. It'll be dark soon, and you don't want to be out here when night falls." "Why? What happens at night?" "Nothing good happens in Blackwater after dark. Not anymore." He moved toward the door, then paused. "The hotel's down the street, left side. I'll help with your trunk." Lillian hesitated, weighing her options. She was alone in an abandoned town with a dangerous-looking stranger who seemed to doubt her identity. But what choice did she have? "Thank you," she said stiffly, "but I can manage." Rook shrugged and stepped outside. Lillian followed cautiously, dragging her trunk behind her. As she emerged onto the boardwalk, she was struck again by the eerie stillness of the town. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. It was as if Blackwater Gulch itself were holding its breath. "Why are you here?" she asked, breaking the silence. "If everyone else is gone, why stay?" Rook didn't look at her as he answered. "Unfinished business." "What kind of business?" "The kind that's none of yours." He nodded toward a 2-story building further down the street. "That's the hotel. Lock your door at night." "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Lillian watched Rook as he walked away, his spurs jangling softly with each step. There was something familiar about him, though she was certain they had never met. Perhaps it was simply his type, the dangerous, silent man who seemed to carry violence just beneath the surface, that she recognized. She had known men like that in Philadelphia, though they had worn fine suits rather than dusty trail clothes. She dragged her trunk down the boardwalk toward the hotel, her mind racing. James Blackwood was dead. Her carefully constructed plan had collapsed before it even began. She had no money to return east, and even if she did, returning was impossible. The scandal would have only grown in her absence. The hotel lobby was thick with dust, but otherwise intact. The registration book lay open on the desk. The last entry dated 4 months ago. A row of keys hung on hooks behind the desk. Lillian selected one at random, room 204, and made her way up the creaking stairs. The room was small, but adequate. A bed with a faded quilt, a washstand with a cracked pitcher, a small writing desk beneath the window. Through the dusty glass, she could see the main street and, in the distance, what must be the entrance to the redemption mine. A dark hole in the mountainside, with abandoned equipment scattered around it. What had happened here? How had a thriving mining town emptied so completely in just a few months? And more importantly, what was she going to do now? Lillian sank onto the bed, exhaustion from the journey finally catching up with her. She removed a small leather pouch from inside her bodice, the last of her money. A few dollars, not nearly enough for a ticket back east, even if returning were an option. She thought of Rook's penetrating gaze, the way he had seemed to look straight through her careful pretense. "Your real name," he had said, not asked, as if he knew she was using a false identity. But how could he know? She had been meticulous in covering her tracks. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the empty town, Lillian unpacked the few essentials she would need for the night. A nightgown, a hairbrush, a small revolver her father had given her years ago, which she placed under her pillow. She changed quickly in the fading light, then lit the oil lamp on the bedside table. Just as she was about to draw the curtains, a movement in the street below caught her eye. Rook stood in front of what appeared to be the sheriff's office, staring up at her window. Even from this distance, she could feel the intensity of his gaze. Then he touched the brim of his hat in a mocking salute and disappeared inside the building. Who was this man, and what did he want? Why had he remained in this ghost town, and what was the unfinished business that kept him here? Most unsettling of all, why did he seem to doubt her identity? Lillian drew the curtains and checked that her door was securely locked. Then she retrieved her journal from her trunk and began to write by lamplight. Arrived in Blackwater Gulch today to find it completely abandoned. James Blackwood is reportedly dead, though I have only the word of a mysterious gunslinger who calls himself Rook. He seems to suspect something about my past. I must be careful around him. She paused, tapping her pen against the page. There was much she couldn't commit to paper, even in her private journal, if anyone were to find it and connect the dots. A sudden noise outside her door, the creak of a floorboard, jolted her from her thoughts. Lillian froze, pen poised above the paper. The sound didn't repeat, but she was certain someone had been there. She closed the journal and slipped it under her pillow, alongside the revolver. Then, moving as quietly as possible, she approached the door and pressed her ear against it. Silence. But somehow she knew she wasn't alone. After a moment's hesitation, she turned the key in the lock and pulled the door open quickly, prepared to confront whoever lurked outside. The hallway was empty, but a folded piece of paper lay on the floor before her door. Lillian picked it up with trembling fingers and retreated back into her room, relocking the door. By the lamplight, she unfolded the paper. The handwriting was bold and angular. "Miss Crawford, or whatever your real name might be, if you value your life, leave Blackwater Gulch on tomorrow's stage. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, and some ghosts don't rest easy. This town has already seen enough death." No signature, but it could only be from Rook. The warning was clear, but the meaning behind it was obscure. Did he know something about her past? Or was there something about Blackwater Gulch itself that made it dangerous for her to stay? Lillian returned to the window and peered cautiously through a gap in the curtains. The town was dark now, the empty buildings mere silhouettes. Against the night sky, a single light burned in what she had identified as the sheriff's office. As she watched, a shadow moved across the window. Rook, presumably. What connection did he have to James Blackwood? Why had he remained when everyone else had fled? And most disturbing of all, how could he possibly suspect that Lillian Crawford was not her real name? Sleep eluded her that night. Every creak of the old hotel's timbers, every whisper of wind through the empty streets outside sounded like approaching danger. When dawn finally broke, Lillian rose from her bed exhausted but resolute. She would not be frightened away by cryptic warnings. She needed answers. She needed to know what had happened to James Blackwood and the residents of Blackwater Gulch. Most importantly, she needed to understand what Rook knew or suspected about her past. After dressing in her simplest day dress, a practical blue, cotton that wouldn't show dust as readily as her other clothes, Lillian ventured downstairs and out onto the main street. Morning light did nothing to soften the town's abandonment. If anything, it made the emptiness more stark, more unsettling. She made her way to the sheriff's office, where she had seen the light burning the night before. The door was unlocked. Inside, the office appeared functional, if Spartan. A desk, a few chairs, a gun rack on the wall, and a single cell at the back with its door standing open. On the desk lay a sheriff's badge and a stack of papers. Lillian approached cautiously and glanced at the documents, wanted posters mostly, for various outlaws. She was about to turn away when a name caught her eye. Quickly, she shuffled through the posters until she found it again. Her blood ran cold. There, staring up at her from the weathered paper, was her own face. Not a perfect likeness, but recognizable nonetheless. Above the sketch were the words, "Wanted, Elizabeth Harrington, for the murder of Senator William Prescott in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, $1,000 reward." A floorboard creaked behind her. Lillian whirled, her hand flying to her reticule where she kept her derringer. Rook stood in the doorway, his expression grim. "Found something interesting, Miss Harrington?" he asked quietly. Lillian backed away, her fingers closing around the small pistol. "Who are you? A bounty hunter?" "Was," he corrected. "Among other things." He stepped into the office, closing the door behind him. "I recognized you the moment I saw you. Been studying that poster for months." "Then why didn't you arrest me yesterday?" Her voice shook, despite her efforts to control it. Rook moved to the desk and picked up the sheriff's badge, turning it over in his fingers. "Because I'm not convinced you killed anyone, Elizabeth Harrington." The use of her real name sent a shock through her system, but his words were even more surprising. "What do you mean?" "I mean that poster came from someone with connections and money, someone who wants you found very badly. And in my experience, when wealthy, powerful men are desperate to find a woman, it's rarely because she's guilty of what they claim." Lillian's grip on the derringer loosened slightly. "You don't know anything about me or what happened in Philadelphia." "I know Senator Prescott had a reputation with young women. I know he was found dead in his study, with a bullet in his chest. I know you disappeared the same night." Rook's pale eyes held hers. "And I know when someone's running from something terrible, because I've been doing it myself most of my life." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Lillian's feet. After months of running, of looking over her shoulder, of constructing an entirely new identity, to be so completely exposed was overwhelming. "If you're not here to collect the bounty, then what do you want from me?" she asked. Information, Rook replied, about Prescott and the people he was connected to. Lillian shook her head, confusion mounting. I don't understand. What could that possibly have to do with an abandoned silver mining town in New Mexico? Territory. Everything. Rook set the badge down and moved to the window, checking the empty street before continuing. James Blackwood wasn't just a mine owner. He was investigating something big. Something that got him killed. What was he investigating? A conspiracy. Wealthy men from back east investing in mines out here. Mines that produce a little silver at first, enough to convince more investors to pour in money. Then the mines mysteriously fail. The investors lose everything. And the same men move on to the next territory, the next town, the next group of eager investors. Understanding began to dawn, and Blackwood discovered this. Rook nodded. He was gathering evidence, names, bank transfers, correspondence. He was going to expose the whole operation. His jaw tightened. Then they killed him, made it look like an accident in the mine. Afterward, they spread rumors that the silver had run out, the town emptied in weeks. But you stayed, Lillian observed. Why? To finish what Blackwood started, to find the evidence he collected before they do. They? Who are they? Rook turned back to face her, his expression deadly serious. Powerful men with political connections, men like Senator William Prescott. The revelation hit Lillian like a physical blow. Prescott was involved in this? But he's dead. She stopped abruptly. You shot him, Rook finished for her. I figured as much. Question is, why? Was it because you discovered what he was involved in? Lillian's knees felt weak. She sank into the chair beside the desk. No, I had no idea about any of this. I shot him because... The words caught in her throat. She hadn't spoken of that night to anyone, had carried the weight of it alone for months. Because he attacked you, Rook suggested quietly. She looked up, startled by his perception. How did you know? Like I said, Prescott had a reputation, and you don't strike me as the cold-blooded murdering type, Miss Harrington. Lillian closed her eyes briefly, memories flooding back. I was his children's governess. That night, he'd been drinking. He cornered me in the study, and when I refused his advances, he became violent. There was a struggle. His gun fell from his desk drawer. I grabbed it and... She couldn't continue. You defended yourself, Rook said firmly. That's not murder, no matter what that poster says. Try telling that to the Philadelphia police, or to Prescott's powerful friends, Lillian replied. Bitterly. By morning I was being hunted as a cold-blooded killer. No one was interested in my side of the story. And now you've fled 3,000 miles, only to land right back in the middle of Prescott's business. Rook shook his head, a grim smile twisting his lips. Fate has a strange way of circling back on itself. I still don't understand. What does any of this have to do with me? I came here to marry James Blackwood, to start a new life. I had no idea he was involved with Prescott or these other men. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Rook moved to the gun rack and removed a Winchester rifle, checking its action. But the fact remains, Miss Harrington, that you're now one of 2 people in Blackwater Gulch who have reason to want justice against the men who were working with Prescott, the other being me. So, what now? Lillian asked. I can't go back. East. I have nowhere else to go, and I certainly don't have the means to continue running. Rook seemed to come to a decision. Now, we help each other. I've been searching for Blackwood's evidence for weeks with no luck. Maybe a fresh pair of eyes will see something I've missed. And in return? In return, I'll help you stay alive and free. The men behind this mining scheme are still out. There. If they discover who you are and what you know about Prescott, they'll come for you next. Lillian weighed her options. She was stranded in an abandoned town with a man who knew her darkest secret, a man who carried guns with the ease of someone accustomed to violence. Yet somehow, she believed him when he said he wanted to help her. "How do I know I can trust you?" she asked finally. "You don't," Rook replied honestly, "just like I don't know if I can trust you. But right now, we're all each other has in this ghost town." As if to punctuate his words, a distant sound caught their attention. Hoofbeats approaching from the east. Rook moved quickly to the window. "Riders coming," he said tersely. "3 of them, and they're not stagecoach men." "How do you know?" "Stage comes from the west. These men are coming from the direction of Santa Fe." He turned to her, his expression grave. "Time to make your decision, Miss Harrington. Are we in this together, or are you on your own?" Lillian thought of the wanted poster with her face on it, of the powerful men who had branded her a murderer, of how close she had come to establishing a new life, only to have it stripped away before it began. She stood and faced Rook squarely. "Together. But I want the truth from you. All of it. Who are you really? And why do you care so much about what happened to James Blackwood?" Something shifted in Rook's pale eyes, a decision made, a trust cautiously extended. The names Samuel Reed, former U.S. Marshal, former bounty hunter. He hesitated, then added, "And James Blackwood was my brother." The revelation hung in the air between them, a final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Before Lillian could respond, Rook, Samuel, moved quickly to the desk and pulled open a drawer, retrieving a second revolver. "Here," he said, offering it to her. "You might need something with more stopping power than that Derringer, if those riders are who I think they are." Lillian took the gun, its weight unfamiliar but somehow reassuring in her hand. "And who do you think they are?" "Men looking for what Blackwood found. Men who kill to keep their secrets." His gaze met hers, intense and unwavering. "Men connected to the one you killed in Philadelphia." Outside, the hoofbeats grew louder, echoing in the empty street of Blackwater Gulch like an approaching storm. Lillian Crawford, Elizabeth Harrington, stood beside the brother of the man she had traveled west to marry, facing a danger neither of them fully understood, but both were determined to confront. Her journey of reinvention had become something else entirely, a fight for truth, for justice, and perhaps for redemption. Whatever secrets this ghost town held, whatever dark past had followed her across the continent, she would no longer run from it. The riders were almost upon them now. Samuel checked his weapons one last time, then looked at her with a question in his eyes. Lillian nodded, a silent confirmation of their unlikely alliance. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," she replied, and was surprised to discover she meant it. Samuel moved quickly to the window, positioning himself to one side to avoid being silhouetted. His posture spoke of years spent in similar situations, tense, alert, but controlled. "Get behind the desk," he instructed, his voice low. "Use it for cover if this goes bad." Lillian complied, crouching behind the solid oak desk, the revolver gripped tightly in both hands. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her mind remained surprisingly clear. Fear had been her constant companion since that fateful night in Philadelphia. She had grown accustomed to its presence. Through the window, she could see dust rising from the approaching riders. They slowed as they entered the town, moving cautiously down the main street. 3 men, heavily armed, scanning the empty buildings with practiced vigilance. "They're looking for something," Samuel murmured. "Or someone." "How can you tell?" Lillian whispered. "The way they're moving, methodical. These aren't random drifters or bandits. They've got purpose." His eyes narrowed. "The one in front, that's Victor Slate. Used to ride with the Carson gang before he went legitimate. Now he works as an enforcer for mining interests." "You know him?" "Brought him in once, years ago. He didn't stay locked up long. Money. Talks in territorial courts." Samuel's expression darkened. "If Slate's here, it's because someone with deep pockets sent him." The riders halted their horses in front of the hotel where Lillian had spent the night. Two of them dismounted while the third, Slate presumably, remained on horseback, surveying the street. After a brief conversation, the dismounted men disappeared into the hotel. "They're searching for you," Samuel said. "Must have tracked you from Santa Fe." Cold dread spread through Lillian's chest. "How? I was careful. I used a different name, traveled with different companions on each leg of the journey. Someone must have made the connection between your disappearance and Blackwood's advertisement for a bride." He glanced at her. "They probably have men watching every mail-order bride arrival in the territory just in case." "What do we do?" Lillian asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Samuel checked his revolver one final time. "We've got two choices. We can slip out the back, try to make it to the mine. There are passages there where we could hide, maybe lose them in the tunnels. Or I go out there and end this now." His voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather rather than potentially killing 3 men. Lillian shook her head. "That's not a real choice. I won't have more blood on my hands." Samuel's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened almost imperceptibly. "Then the mine it is. Stay low, stay quiet, and follow my lead." They moved silently to the back door of the sheriff's office. Samuel eased it open, checking the narrow alley behind the building before motioning Lillian through. The morning sun had not yet reached between the structures, leaving the passage in deep shadow. "The mine entrance is half a mile up that rise," Samuel whispered, pointing to the hillside beyond the town. "If we stay behind the buildings, we might make it without being spotted." They crept forward, moving from shadow to shadow, pausing at each intersection to check for movement. From somewhere near the hotel came muffled shouts, the searchers discovering Lillian's abandoned room, perhaps. "They'll check here next," Samuel warned. "We need to move faster." As they reached the edge of town, the cover of buildings gave way to open scrubland dotted with sage and stunted juniper. The mine entrance was clearly visible now, a dark moor in the hillside with abandoned equipment scattered around it. "We'll have to make a run for it," Samuel said. "Ready?" Lillian nodded, gathering her skirts in one hand, revolver still clutched in the other. "Now!" Samuel urged, and they broke from cover, sprinting across the open ground toward the mine. They had covered perhaps half the distance when a shout rang out behind them. Lillian didn't look back, focusing only on the mine entrance ahead. A gunshot cracked, the bullet sending up a spray of dirt to her right. Samuel returned fire without. Breaking stride, the report of his revolver echoing across the empty landscape. Another shot from behind, closer this time. Then they were at the mine entrance, plunging into its cool darkness. "Keep moving," Samuel instructed, his hand at her elbow, guiding her deeper into the shaft. "They'll be right behind us." The daylight faded quickly as they hurried into the earth. Soon the only illumination came from shafts of light penetrating ventilation holes above. The air grew cooler, heavy with the scent of damp stone and minerals. "Wait!" Samuel's grip tightened on her arm, halting her. He reached into his coat and produced a small tin, then struck a match. A moment later, a small lantern flared too, life, casting their shadows against the rough-hewn walls. "This way," he said, taking a side passage that sloped gently downward. "The main shaft is too obvious. They'll expect us to follow it." The passage narrowed as they descended, the ceiling dropping until Samuel had to duck his head. Support timbers appeared at regular intervals, many looking worryingly old and stressed. "Are you sure this is safe?" Lillian asked, eyeing a timber that bowed alarmingly under the weight it supported. "Safer than facing Slate and his men in the open," Samuel replied grimly. "The Redemption was a good mine before all this. Blackwood knew what he was doing with his supports and ventilation." They continued in silence for several minutes, the passage twisting and occasionally branching. Samuel seemed to know the way, never hesitating at intersections. The sound of their pursuers faded, then disappeared entirely. Finally, the passage opened into a larger chamber. Mining equipment lay scattered about. Picks, shovels, an ore cart tipped on its side. In the center of the chamber stood a rough, wooden table with maps and papers spread across it. "Blackwood's office," Samuel explained, raising the lantern higher. He preferred to work down here, close to the operations. Lillian approached the table, examining the materials spread across it. Most appeared to be mining-related: surveys, equipment inventories, work schedules. Nothing that screamed conspiracy or evidence. "I've been through every paper in this room," Samuel said, noting her interest. "Whatever evidence James collected against Prescott and his partners, he didn't keep it here." "Then why come here now?" Lillian asked. "Because it's defensible, has multiple exits, and because I'm still convinced the evidence is somewhere in this mine." Samuel set the lantern on the table. James was methodical, careful. He wouldn't have kept incriminating documents where just anyone could find them. Lillian glanced around the chamber, taking in details Samuel might have overlooked. Her gaze fell on a small portrait in a silver frame, partially hidden behind a stack of ledgers. She picked it up carefully. The photograph showed two young men, perhaps in their early 20s. One she recognized immediately as a younger Samuel Reed, his features less weathered, but with the same intensity in his pale eyes. The other must be James Blackwood, similar in build to his brother, but with a more open expression, his eyes crinkled at the corners as if he smiled easily and often. "Half-brothers, actually," Samuel said, noticing her examination of the photograph. "Same mother, different fathers. I took our mother's name, Reed. James took his father's, Blackwood." "You look close," Lillian observed. "Yet you said you hadn't seen him for years." A shadow passed across Samuel's face. "The war changed things. Changed me. James went west afterward, tried to make an honest life. He hesitated. "I took a different path. U.S. Marshal for a while, then bounty hunting when the badge started to feel too heavy." "What brought you back together?" "His letters. James started writing about strange happenings at the mine. Investors pushing for expanded operations beyond what made sense. Pressure to falsify production reports." Samuel's jaw tightened. "By the time I got here, he was already dead. Mining accident, supposedly. A shaft collapse." "But you don't believe it was an accident," Lillian surmised. "James knew every inch of this mine. He'd never have entered an unstable section without proper supports." Samuel's voice had hardened. Someone triggered that collapse deliberately with him inside. Distant sounds echoed down the passage, voices, the scrape of boots on stone. Their pursuers had found the right tunnel. "They're coming," Lillian whispered, gripping the revolver tighter. Samuel moved quickly to a wooden cabinet against the wall and pulled out several sticks of dynamite and a coil of fuse. "I was hoping to avoid this," he muttered, working rapidly to connect the explosives. "What are you doing?" "Creating a distraction." He positioned the dynamite near the entrance to the chamber, unspooling fuse back toward a second passage on the far side. "When they get close, I'll light it. The blast should discourage further pursuit and may collapse part of the tunnel. Might buy us time to find another way out." The voices grew closer. Samuel finished his preparations and motioned Lillian toward the second passage. "Go. I'll be right behind you." Lillian hesitated, reluctant to leave him. In the short time since their paths had crossed, an unexpected trust had formed between them, two wounded souls finding unexpected common cause. "Go," Samuel repeated more urgently. This time she obeyed, taking the lantern and moving swiftly into the indicated passage. A moment later, Samuel joined her, a lit match in his hand. He touched it to the fuse, which began to sputter and burn, then hurried her deeper into the mine. "Cover your ears," he warned, as they rounded a corner. Even with the warning and her hands pressed tightly against her ears, the explosion was deafening in the confined space. The ground shook beneath them, dust and small rocks showering down from the ceiling. For a terrifying moment, Lillian thought the entire mine might collapse upon them. Then the rumbling subsided, leaving only drifting dust and the distant sound of falling debris. "That should slow them down," Samuel said with grim satisfaction. "Come on, there's another way to the surface through here." The passage climbed steadily upward, eventually branching into multiple smaller tunnels. Samuel chose one without hesitation, though to Lillian they all looked identical. "How do you know your way around so well?" she asked as they navigated a particularly narrow section. "Spent weeks exploring after I arrived," he replied. "Needed to understand the place where James died. Thought it might help me find what he'd hidden." The air grew fresher as they ascended, hints of daylight appearing through cracks overhead. Finally, they emerged from a small opening partially concealed by scrub brush. They were on the far side of the hill from town, overlooking a rugged canyon. Samuel carefully scanned their surroundings, then motioned Lillian to a sheltered hollow beneath an overhanging rock. "We should be safe here for a while. They won't expect us to have come this way." Lillian sank gratefully onto a flat stone, her legs trembling from exertion and fading adrenaline. Now that they had a moment of relative safety, questions bubbled to the surface. "You said powerful men with political connections were involved in this mining scheme," she began. "Men like Senator Prescott. Who else?" Samuel settled across from her, keeping his eyes on the mine entrance they had just exited. James mentioned several names in his letters: Governor Whitfield of Colorado Territory, Judge Carlton Myers of the Territorial Court, a banker named Hargrove from Boston. Lillian's breath caught. "Hargrove? Frederick Hargrove?" Samuel's gaze snapped to her face. "You know him?" "He was a friend of Senator Prescott's, visited the house often for dinner parties and political meetings." Lillian's mind raced, connecting dots she hadn't known existed. They would closet themselves in the study with maps and papers, talking for hours. "What else do you remember? Anything about mines, investments, territorial holdings?" Lillian closed her eyes, forcing herself to revisit memories she had tried to suppress. "I wasn't privy to their discussions, but I did overhear things while serving tea or retrieving the children. They mentioned something called the Syndicate several times, and there was a man they deferred to, never present, but often mentioned. They called him the Colonel." Samuel leaned forward intently. "The Colonel? You're certain?" "Yes. They seemed almost afraid when speaking of him." Lillian opened her eyes, meeting Samuel's intense gaze. "Does that mean something to you?" "Maybe. There's a man who fits that description. Colonel Thaddeus Montgomery, former Union officer, now one of the wealthiest men in the country. Railroads, banks, mining interests from Pennsylvania to California." Samuel's expression was grim. "If he's the one behind this, we're facing something bigger than I imagined." "What exactly is this? You've mentioned a scheme, a conspiracy, but what are they actually doing?" Samuel picked up a small stone and turned it over in his fingers, organizing his thoughts. "From what James discovered, it works like this. The syndicate identifies promising mining areas in the territories. They purchase land, establish operations, produce just enough ore to create excitement. Then they solicit investors, prominent, men looking to expand their fortunes. Once they've collected significant capital, the mines mysteriously fail. The investors lose everything, while the syndicate moves on to the next territory, the next group of eager investors." "But that's just fraud," Lillian observed. "Terrible, yes, but hardly worth killing over. It goes deeper. The mines don't actually fail. That's just what they tell the investors. In reality, they continue operation with skeleton crews, extracting wealth that goes directly to the syndicate. No shareholders to pay, no dividends to distribute. Samuel's voice hardened. And when a mine genuinely stops producing, they have been known to seed it with stolen federal gold and silver from government shipments. That's why they would need men like Prescott and the governor, Lillian realized. Political protection. Exactly. And judges to dismiss cases when suspicions arise. Samuel tossed the stone away. What makes Blackwater different is that the redemption mine was genuinely productive. James refused to join their scheme, refused to falsify reports or betray his legitimate investors, so they arranged his accident and spread rumors that the mine had failed. And now they want to make sure no evidence of their crimes survives, Lillian concluded. That's why Slate and his men are here. Samuel nodded. James told me in his last letter that he had gathered proof, names, dates, bank transfers, details of their entire operation across 3 territories. Enough to bring down the syndicate entirely, but he never told me where he hid it. A thought struck Lillian. The wanted poster with my face. You said it came from someone with connections and money. Do you think it's connected to all this? Almost certainly. You killed Prescott, who was part of the syndicate. They couldn't let that pass, couldn't risk you talking about anything you might have overheard in his house. Samuel's gaze was sympathetic. The murder charge was convenient. Discredit you, silence you, and make an example of what happens to those who cross them, all at once. The realization was chilling. Lillian had believed she was fleeing justice for a justifiable act of self-defense. In reality, she had been fleeing something far more sinister. A powerful organization that eliminated anyone who threatened its interests. So what now? She asked. We can't hide in this mine forever. Samuel was quiet for a moment, weighing their options. We need to find James's evidence. With it, we could expose the syndicate, clear your name, and get justice for my brother. And without it, we're just a wanted fugitive and a former lawman with a grudge. His expression was bleak. Wouldn't give much for our chances in that scenario. Then we find the evidence, Lillian said with more confidence than she felt. Where haven't you looked yet? There's a section of the mine I haven't fully explored. The newest shaft started just before James died. It's deeper than the others, less stable. Samuel hesitated. It's also where they claim the accident happened. I've avoided it, partly from lack of proper equipment, partly because that's where your brother died, Lillian finished, softly. And you're not sure you want to see it. Samuel didn't respond, but the tightening of his jaw confirmed her assessment. She reached out impulsively, placing her hand over his. We'll go together, she said, after dark, when Slate and his men might have given up the search for today. He looked at her hand covering his, then back to her face, surprise evident in his features. You're not what I expected, Elizabeth Harrington. Nor you, Samuel. Read. She withdrew her hand, suddenly self-conscious. When I came west to marry a man I knew only through letters, I thought I was embracing a safer, simpler life. Instead, I found myself in the midst of conspiracy and danger once again. Fate has a strange way of putting us exactly where we need to be, even when it's the last place we want to be. Samuel's voice had softened. James would have liked you, I think. He had the same stubborn courage, the same unwillingness to run from a fight that needed fighting. The unexpected compliment warmed something in Lillian that had been cold for a very long time. Since that terrible night in Philadelphia, she had viewed herself as a fugitive, tainted by violence. To be seen as courageous rather than criminal was both unfamiliar and deeply moving. They sat in companionable silence as the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting dappled shadows through the scrub brush sheltering their hiding place. In the distance, the abandoned town of Blackwater Gulch shimmered in the heat like a mirage, a ghost of prosperity lost to greed and corruption. "Tell me about him," Lillian said eventually. "Your brother. What was he like?" A ghost of a smile touched Samuel's lips. Stubborn, brilliant with numbers and geology, terrible at cards. He could find silver where other men saw only worthless rock. The smile faded, and honest, to a fault. That's what got him killed in the end. He wouldn't bend, wouldn't look the other way. "He sounds like a good man. The best I've known." Samuel met her gaze directly. "I've spent most of my life chasing men who broke the law, some poor and desperate, others rich and arrogant. But I've never wanted justice more than I do now for James." "Justice, not revenge?" Lillian asked carefully. Samuel considered this. "Both, perhaps. I want the syndicate exposed, their schemes ended. I want the men responsible for James's death to face a judge and jury." His eyes hardened. "But I won't deny I'd sleep better knowing Slate and his kind were in the ground." His candor was refreshing. No pretense of purely noble motives. No hiding the darkness that clearly lived alongside his sense of justice. It made Lillian trust him more, not less. "And you?" he asked unexpectedly. "What do you want now, Elizabeth? If we find this evidence, clear your name, what then?" The question caught her off guard. She had been running for so long, focused only on escape and survival, that she hadn't allowed herself to consider a future beyond it. "I don't know," she admitted. "My life in Philadelphia is gone, my reputation destroyed. Even if we prove I killed Prescott in self-defense, there would always be whispers, suspicions. You could start fresh somewhere. San Francisco, perhaps, or further north, Seattle, Portland, places where a woman with education and determination can build something." The suggestion held appeal, a genuine fresh start, free from both the constraints of Philadelphia society and the shadow of Prescott's death. But something else tugged at her thoughts, a half-formed notion she barely dared acknowledge. "First, we find the evidence," she said, setting aside the question of her future. "One impossible task at a time." Samuel nodded, accepting her deflection. He rose and moved to the edge of their shelter, studying the terrain below. No sign of Slate or his men. They're either still in the mine, or they've returned to town to regroup. "How long until nightfall?" Lillian asked. 6, maybe 7 hours. Samuel glanced at the sun's position. "We should rest while we can. Once we enter that unstable section of the mine, we'll need our wits about us." As if to emphasize his point, a distant rumble echoed across the canyon, the after effects of their earlier explosion perhaps, or the natural settling of the mountain. "Will it be safe, this new shaft?" Lillian asked, unable to keep the apprehension from her voice. Samuel's expression was grave. "Mining is never truly safe, especially in a shaft that's been abandoned for months. But we'll take precautions, and sometimes the most dangerous path is the only one worth taking." The words hung between them, applicable to far more than their immediate situation. Both had chosen dangerous paths rather than safe ones. He, in pursuing justice for his brother, she in fleeing rather than submitting to a corrupt system that would have condemned her unjustly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Samuel fashioned a simple shelter using his coat and some brush, creating a shaded space where Lillian could rest. She settled into it gratefully, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. Her journey west had been grueling, followed by a night of little sleep and a morning of life-threatening pursuit. "I'll keep watch," Samuel assured her. "Try to sleep. Tonight will test us both." Lillian didn't think sleep would come, but the combination of physical exhaustion and emotional strain quickly pulled her under. Her dreams were fragmented, troubled. Senator Prescott's face contorting with rage, the explosive sound of the gunshot that ended his life, the endless running that followed. Then James Blackwood appeared, his face kind as in the photograph, but his eyes filled with urgent warning. He was trying to tell her something vital, but no sound emerged from his moving lips. He pointed repeatedly to something she couldn't see, his gestures becoming more desperate. "Elizabeth." Samuel's voice broke through the dream, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "It's time." Lillian blinked awake, momentarily disoriented. The quality of light had changed, softer, golden with approaching sunset. She had slept longer than intended. "Any sign of Slate?" she asked, sitting up and smoothing her rumpled dress. "They came out of the mine about 3 hours ago, headed back to town. Haven't seen movement since." Samuel offered her his canteen. "Drink. It's going to be dry work underground." As she drank, Lillian tried to recall the details of her dream. Something about it felt important, a subconscious connection her waking mind hadn't made yet. But the images were already fading, leaving only a lingering sense of urgency. They waited until dusk deepened into true darkness before making their way back to the mine entrance. Samuel had prepared 2 lanterns, matches, and a coil of rope. He had also collected several sturdy pieces of wood to serve as supports if needed. "Stay close," he advised as they re-entered the mine. "Step where I step. If I say freeze, don't move. If I say run, don't look back. Understood?" Lillian nodded, appreciating his directness. There was no room for misunderstanding in such dangerous conditions. They moved cautiously through the tunnels, retracing their earlier path until they reached the chamber that had served as James Blackwood's office. The entrance was partially collapsed from Samuel's dynamite, but still passable. Inside, everything remained as they had left it, though a thicker layer of dust now covered the surfaces. Samuel studied a map pinned to the wall, a detailed rendering of the mine's tunnels and shafts. "The new section is here," he said, pointing to an area marked with dotted rather than solid lines. "It branches off from the main shaft at the 3rd level down." "What are we looking for exactly?" Lillian asked. "Papers? A strongbox?" "Could be anything." James was creative when it came to hiding things. As children, he once kept a journal in a hollowed-out section of his bed frame where our stepfather wouldn't find it. A faint smile touched Samuel's lips at the memory. Whatever it is, it will be somewhere significant to him, but not obvious to others. They descended into the mine's depths, Samuel leading the way with sure-footed confidence despite the increasingly treacherous terrain. The main shaft was well constructed, with sturdy timber supports placed at regular intervals, but as they ventured deeper, Lillian noticed signs of hasty work. Supports spaced too far apart, tunnel walls less precisely cut. James was pushing to complete this section quickly, Samuel explained, noting her concerned expression. The deeper they went, the richer the ore deposits. But he was still careful with the structural work. These supports aren't his style. They were added after, probably by the syndicate's men. At the 3rd level down, they reached a junction where a newer passage branched off from the main shaft. The air grew noticeably cooler and damper. Water trickled down one wall, catching the lantern light like liquid silver. "This is it," Samuel said softly. "The new shaft. According to the official report, this is where the collapse occurred that killed James." Lillian could feel his tension, the effort it took for him to face this place. She moved closer to his side, her presence offering silent support. "We don't have to do this tonight," she said gently. "We could rest, return tomorrow with clearer minds." Samuel shook his head. If not now, I might never find the courage again. He squared his shoulders. Besides, Slate and his men could return at dawn with reinforcements. This might be our only chance. The new passage was narrower than the main shaft, barely wide enough for two people to walk abreast. The ceiling hung lower, forcing Samuel to duck in places. Their lanterns cast elongated shadows that danced across the rough-hewn walls like restless spirits. About 50 yards in, they encountered the first evidence of the collapse. Fallen rocks and splintered timbers partially blocked the path. Samuel examined the debris carefully, his expression darkening. "This was no accident," he said, voice tight with controlled anger. "Look." He pointed to a support beam that had been partially severed. This was cut deliberately, weakened so it would fail under pressure. Lillian felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mine's temperature. They murdered him. They lured him down here and buried him alive. James would have recognized sabotage if he'd seen it, Samuel replied grimly, which means they must have triggered the collapse from a distance, or... He couldn't finish the thought. Or someone he trusted betrayed him, Lillian completed softly. They carefully picked their way through the debris. Beyond the initial collapse, the tunnel continued, though in much worse condition. The ceiling showed ominous cracks, and several support beams leaned at dangerous angles. "Step lightly," Samuel cautioned. "The whole section could be unstable." They proceeded with agonizing slowness, testing each step before committing their weight. Twice they had to backtrack when the path ahead seemed too dangerous to navigate. All the while, Samuel searched the walls and floor with methodical attention, looking for any sign of his brother's hidden evidence. "It has to be here somewhere," he muttered, frustration edging his voice. James wouldn't have hidden it anywhere else. Lillian paused, struck by a thought. "Samuel, if James suspected someone was sabotaging the mine, would he really hide crucial evidence in the very section at risk?" Samuel stopped, considering her question. "You're right. It doesn't make sense." His brow furrowed in concentration. Unless he never intended to hide it here at all." "What do you mean?" "What if the evidence isn't in this shaft? What if it's near it, but deliberately placed somewhere these new supports would eventually reveal?" Excitement crept into his voice. James was always thinking 3 steps ahead. If he suspected sabotage, he might have turned it against the saboteurs themselves. Samuel moved back to examine one of the newer support beams, those he had identified as added after his brother's death. It was positioned oddly, not quite flush against the wall as the others were. He ran his hands along the rough timber, then along the wall behind it. "There's a gap here," he said, voice hushed with discovery, "a small cavity in the wall, hidden by the beam." With renewed urgency, Samuel worked to shift the timber slightly, creating enough space for him to reach into the hidden opening. His face tightened with effort as he stretched his arm deep into the cavity. "I feel something," he grunted. "Metal. A box of some kind." After several tense moments of maneuvering, Samuel extracted a small metal lockbox from its hiding place. It was about the size of a thick book, made of heavy steel, with a sturdy padlock securing its lid. "This is it," he breathed, turning the box in his hands with a mixture of reverence and triumph. "This has to be it." A foreboding rumble vibrated through the tunnel, dislodging small stones from the ceiling. Both froze, hardly daring to breathe until the sound faded. "We need to get out of here," Lillian urged. "This whole section could come down at any moment." Samuel nodded, clutching the lockbox tightly. "Back the way we came, carefully." They had retraced their steps perhaps halfway when a more violent tremor shook the passage. A crack like a rifle shot echoed through the tunnel as one of the compromised support beams splintered. "Run!" Samuel shouted, pushing Lillian ahead of him. They abandoned caution, racing through the unstable tunnel as the rumbling intensified. Behind them, the deadly sound of collapsing rock spurred them to greater speed. Dust filled the air, choking and blinding. Lillian stumbled over unseen debris, but somehow kept her footing, propelled by primal fear. Just as they reached the junction with the main shaft, the tunnel behind them gave way completely. The force of the collapse sent them sprawling into the relative safety of the larger passage. Samuel shielded Lillian with his body as dust and smaller rocks showered down around them. When the chaos finally subsided, they found themselves in near total darkness. Both lanterns had been extinguished in their desperate flight. They lay still, coughing in the dust-filled air, the sound of their labored breathing unnaturally loud. In the sudden quiet, "Are you hurt?" Samuel asked, his voice hoarse. "No, I don't think so," Lillian managed between coughs. "You?" "Nothing serious." He shifted away from her, and she heard him patting his pockets. "I still have matches, and the box." A small flame flickered to life as Samuel lit a match. In its meager light, Lillian could see his face streaked with dirt and sweat, a small cut bleeding above his eyebrow. He looked fierce, primeval, yet his hands were gentle as he helped her sit up. "The new shaft is completely gone," he observed, casting the matchlight toward where the tunnel entrance had been. Only a solid wall of fallen rock remained. "If we'd been a few seconds slower." The match burned down to his fingers, and he shook it out with a muttered oath. Darkness enveloped them once more. "We should keep moving," Lillian suggested. "Find our way back to the surface before lighting the lanterns again. Save the matches." Agreed. The main shaft should be straightforward, even in darkness. Keep one hand on the wall and stay close. They made their way carefully up through the main passage, feeling their way through the darkness like blind creatures. The air grew gradually fresher as they ascended, and eventually a faint greyish light appeared ahead, moonlight filtering in from the mine entrance. Emerging into the night air felt like resurrection. Lillian gulped deep breaths, never having appreciated simple fresh air so profoundly. The moon hung full and bright overhead, bathing the abandoned town of Blackwater Gulch in silvery light. "We need to find cover," Samuel said, scanning their surroundings with practiced wariness. "Somewhere to examine the contents of this box without being observed." "The sheriff's office," Lillian suggested. Samuel shook his head. "Too obvious. They'll check there first if they return tonight." He considered for a moment. "The assay office. It's on the edge of town, partially hidden by those cottonwoods, and it would have tools if we need to break this lock." They moved cautiously through the silent town, keeping to shadows and avoiding the open street. The assay office was a small, sturdy building where ore samples had once been tested for precious metal content. Its windows were boarded up, but Samuel found a rear door with a lock he could pick. Inside, dust shrouded abandoned equipment and furniture. Samuel lit one of their lanterns, keeping the flame low, and set it on a heavy wooden table in the center of the room. Then he placed the lockbox beside it with ceremonial care. "This is it," he said quietly. "Whatever James discovered, whatever got him killed, it's in this box." The lock resisted their initial attempts at opening. It was a quality mechanism, impervious to the simple tools they found in the assay office. After several frustrating attempts, Samuel retrieved his revolver. "Stand back," he instructed, "and cover your ears." The gunshot was deafening in the confined space, despite Lillian's covered ears. When the ringing subsided, she opened her eyes to see Samuel lifting the lid of the now damaged lockbox. Inside lay several folded documents, a small leather journal, and a stack of photographs. Samuel spread them carefully across the table, handling each item as if it might disintegrate at any moment. "My God," he whispered as he examined the contents. "James, you clever, thorough bastard." Lillian leaned forward, taking in the evidence before them. The documents included bank transfers showing enormous sums moving between numbered accounts, correspondence between syndicate members discussing removing obstacles and ensuring cooperation, and detailed maps of mining operations across 3 territories, with notations of actual versus reported production. Most damning were the photographs, candid shots of prominent men in compromising situations or engaged in clearly illegal acts. Senator Prescott featured in several, alongside Judge Myers, Governor Whitfield, and other men Lillian didn't recognize. "James must have hired a Pinkerton photographer," Samuel said, astonishment in his voice. "Some of these would have taken months to obtain." The leather journal proved to be James Blackwood's personal record of the syndicate's operations, meticulously documented with dates, names, and specific criminal acts. The final entry was dated 3 days before his death. Evidence complete. Confirmed the colonel's identity as Thaddeus Montgomery. Sending copies to Marshall's office in Denver tomorrow. If anything happens to me, S knows where to look. He knew they were coming for him, Lillian said softly. He was ready to expose them all. And they killed him for it. Samuel's voice was tight with emotion. But they were too late. He'd already hidden the evidence where I would eventually find it. He closed his eyes briefly. I just wish I'd arrived sooner. Lillian placed her hand over his. You're here now, and so is his evidence. He trusted you to finish what he started, and you will. Samuel nodded, drawing strength from her words and touch. We need to get these to Denver, to the Marshal's office. They'll have the authority to issue warrants, even for men as powerful as the colonel. Denver is at least a week's journey, Lillian pointed out, and Slate and his men are still hunting us. There's a telegraph office in Riverton, 2 days' ride from here. If we can get there, we can wire the Denver office to send marshals to meet us. Samuel began carefully repacking the documents. We'll need horses, supplies. A floorboard creaked behind them. Both whirled toward the sound, Samuel's hand flying to his revolver. But he froze when he saw what awaited them. Victor Slate stood in the doorway, revolver already drawn, and aimed at Samuel's chest. Behind him, his 2 companions covered the room with rifles. Well now, Slate drawled, a cruel smile spreading across his weathered face. Looks like our patience paid off, boys. The syndicate will be mighty pleased when we bring them Blackwood's evidence and his troublesome brother. His gaze shifted to Lillian. And Miss Elizabeth Harrington, too. That's a hefty bonus. Samuel's expression betrayed nothing, though Lillian could sense the calculations running behind his composed exterior. They were outnumbered, outgunned, with no clear path to escape. How long were you watching us? Samuel asked, his voice level. Long enough, Slate replied. Followed your tracks from the mine entrance. Figured you'd head somewhere private. To examine whatever you found. His smile widened. The colonel said you were predictable, Reed. Looks like he was right. Lillian's mind raced. The colonel knew Samuel. There was history there beyond what she'd been told. You do realize what's in this box condemns your employers, Samuel said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. Murder, fraud, corruption. At the highest levels, the syndicate will fall when this evidence becomes public. Slate shrugged. Maybe so, but it won't be becoming public, will it? And I get paid either way. He gestured with his revolver. Now slide that box over here, nice and slow. Samuel didn't move. You know they'll kill us whether we cooperate or not. Probably, Slate agreed, unconcerned. But how you die is still negotiable. Quick and clean, or slow and messy. Your choice. The standoff stretched, tension crackling in the air like static before a lightning strike. Lillian watched Samuel's face, saw the minute shift in his eyes that signaled decision. All right, Samuel said, reaching for the box with deliberate slowness. No need for messy. As his hand touched the metal container, his other hand moved with stunning speed, sweeping the lantern off the table towards Slate and his men. The oil ignited instantly as the lamp shattered, creating a momentary wall of flame and confusion. In that chaos, Samuel drew and fired in one fluid motion. One of the riflemen crumpled with a cry of pain. Slate returned fire, his bullet splintering the wood where Samuel had been standing a split second earlier. "The back door!" Samuel shouted to Lillian, shoving the lockbox into her hands. "Run!" Lillian clutched the precious evidence and darted toward the rear of the building as Samuel provided covering fire. The second rifleman's shot went wide, embedding in the wall inches from her head. Then she was through the door, out into the moonlit night, the sounds of gunfire echoing behind her. She hesitated, torn between running to safety with the evidence and fear for Samuel facing 3 armed men alone. The decision was made for her when Samuel appeared in the doorway, backing out while still exchanging shots with Slate. "Go!" he urged, spotting her. "The stables! Quickly!" They sprinted through the darkness toward the town stables. Behind them, Slate and his remaining man emerged from the assay office in pursuit, firing as they came. A bullet whistled past Lillian's ear. Another kicked up dirt at her feet. Samuel spun and fired twice more, forcing their pursuers to dive for cover. The momentary reprieve allowed them to reach the stables unseen. Inside, 2 horses still occupied the stalls, likely belonging to Slate and his men. Samuel worked quickly to saddle them, while Lillian kept watch at the door, lockbox clutched tightly to her chest. "They're coming," she whispered urgently, glimpsing movement in the moonlight. "At least 3 of them now." "Must have had reinforcements waiting," Samuel muttered, tightening a cinch strap. "Here, take this." He handed her a Winchester rifle from a wall rack. "You know how to use it?" "My father taught me to shoot when I was 12, she replied, checking the weapon with practiced hands. "Said a woman alone needed to protect herself. Wise man." Samuel led the horses to the rear stable door. "I'll create a distraction. When I do, ride north out of town. There's a trail that leads to Riverton through the high country. I'll find you." Lillian felt a stab of alarm. "We should stay together. They'll expect that. If we separate, at least one of us has a chance of getting the evidence to Denver." His eyes held hers intently. "If we're separated, don't wait for me. Get to Riverton, wire the marshal's office, tell them everything." Before she could protest further, Samuel slipped outside. Moments later, she heard him let loose a barrage of gunfire, followed by shouts from Slate and his men. Taking advantage of the distraction, Lillian mounted one of the horses, secured the lockbox in a saddlebag, and guided the animal through the back entrance of the stable. Once clear, she urged the horse into a gallop, heading north away from town as instructed. She risked a glance back as she crested a small rise. The scene below was chaotic, muzzle flashes illuminating the darkness as Samuel engaged with Slate's group, drawing their attention away from her escape. Then the night swallowed her, and Blackwater Gulch disappeared from view. Lillian rode hard through the darkness, letting the horse pick its way along the trail that wound into the foothills north of town. Her mind churned with fear for Samuel, coupled with determination to complete their mission. The evidence she carried could bring down the syndicate, vindicate James Blackwood, and perhaps even clear her own name. After an hour of hard riding, she slowed the horse to a more sustainable pace. The animal was strong, but would need to conserve energy for the long journey ahead. The trail climbed steadily into rugged country, far from the main roads where Slate's men might search for her. As false dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Lillian found a sheltered hollow beside a small creek. She dismounted, allowing the horse to drink while she assessed her situation. She had the evidence: a rifle with limited ammunition, a canteen of water, and whatever supplies were in the saddlebags. No food, no map, and only the vaguest idea of how to reach Riverton, and no Samuel. The realization of her solitude settled. like a weight upon her shoulders. Since arriving in Blackwater Gulch, she had come to rely on Samuel's strength and knowledge. Now she was alone again, a fugitive in unfamiliar territory with dangerous men pursuing her. For a moment, despair threatened to overwhelm her. Then a memory surfaced, Samuel's words from their conversation in the mine. Fate has a strange way of putting us exactly where we need to be, even when it's the last place we want to be. Was this where she needed to be? Alone in the wilderness, carrying evidence of corruption that had already cost James Blackwood his life, and might have cost Samuel his as well. Lillian straightened her spine, drawing a deep breath of the cool morning air. Yes, this was exactly where she needed to be. She had spent months running from her past, seeking safety in anonymity. Now she had the chance to stand and fight, to seek justice rather than merely escape consequences. She rummaged through the saddlebags, finding a small packet of jerky, matches, and a folded map. Unfolding the latter, she traced the route from Blackwater Gulch to Riverton with her finger. 2 days' ride through demanding terrain, but it was clearly marked. The evidence was secure in its lockbox, tucked safely in the saddlebag. Thaddeus Montgomery, the colonel, might be one of the most powerful men in the country, but his empire of corruption would crumble when these documents reached the proper authorities. As the sun crested the eastern mountains, painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber, Lillian felt an unfamiliar sensation blossoming in her chest. Not fear or resignation, but a fierce, burning hope. For the first time since that fateful night in Senator Prescott's study, she was moving towards something rather than away from it. She allowed herself and the horse a brief rest, then mounted and continued north. The trail grew increasingly rugged, switchbacking up steep inclines and traversing narrow ridgelines. By midday, she had climbed high enough to look back over the valley where Blackwater Gulch nestled like a discarded toy. No signs of pursuit were visible, though that didn't mean Slate and his men weren't following. They were experienced trackers. They would know which way she had gone. Her only advantages were her head start and her determination. As the day wore on, Lillian settled into the rhythm of travel, allowing her mind to wander. She thought of the photograph of the two brothers, Samuel and James, so similar yet different, of Samuel's face when he spoke of justice for his brother, of the gentle strength in his hands as he helped her through the mine's darkness. She wondered if he had escaped Slate's men, if he was following her trail even now, or if he lay back in Blackwater Gulch, another victim of the syndicate's ruthless elimination of threats. The thought spurred her to push harder, to cover more ground. If Samuel had sacrificed himself to ensure her escape with the evidence, she would not waste that sacrifice. By late afternoon, storm clouds gathered over the mountains ahead. The air grew heavy with the promise of rain, and distant thunder rumbled ominously. Lillian knew she needed to find shelter before the storm broke. The trail dipped into a small valley where pines clustered densely around a stream. Near the water stood a crude line cabin, a simple one-room structure used by cowboys tending distant sections of ranch land. It appeared abandoned, its door hanging crookedly on leather hinges. Lillian approached cautiously, rifle ready. The cabin showed no signs of recent use. Dust lay thick on the single table. The stone fireplace was cold and empty. It would provide adequate shelter from the approaching storm. She unsaddled the horse and secured it in a lean-to attached to the cabin's side, then carried the precious lockbox and rifle inside. The accommodations were sparse. A rough bunk built into one wall, a table with a single chair, a few shelves holding dusty tins and bottles. As the first fat raindrops began to fall, Lillian set about making the cabin habitable. She swept the worst of the dust out with a broom of bound twigs, gathered kindling from the lean-to, and started a small fire in the fireplace. The warmth and light transformed the dismal space into something almost welcoming. She found a tin of beans and another of peaches on the shelf, their labels faded, but contents still good. It wasn't a feast, but it would sustain her. As she ate by firelight, the storm raged outside, rain lashing the cabin's roof and thunder cracking overhead. The isolation was complete. No other human for miles, just Lillian and her thoughts. She opened the lockbox again, examining the evidence more carefully now that she had proper light and time. James Blackwood's journal contained not just documentation of the syndicate's crimes, but his personal reflections on what he had discovered. His handwriting grew increasingly agitated in the later entries, his concern for the investors, he felt, responsible for evident in every line. The last few pages detailed his suspicions that someone close to him was reporting to the syndicate, someone he had trusted who was now monitoring his activities and communications. He had written, "If my suspicions are correct, I have precious little time before they move against me. S will know what to do with this evidence. He always did have a clearer sense of justice than I, even when we were boys. I only hope he forgives me for drawing him into danger once again." Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes as she read the words. James had known he was likely to die, had prepared for it, yet had persisted in gathering evidence against the syndicate. Such courage in the face of certain danger humbled her. And Samuel, he had come at his brother's implicit request, had devoted himself to completing James's mission, even at risk to his own life. The brothers, though separated by circumstance and perhaps ideology, had remained bound by something stronger than blood, a shared belief in justice and truth. And Lillian carefully replaced the journal in the lockbox. Tomorrow she would continue to Riverton, would send the telegraph that would set the wheels of justice in motion. The syndicate's days of operating in shadows would soon end. As she prepared for sleep, arranging a simple bed from the rough blankets found in the cabin, a noise outside caught her attention. Not thunder, but the distinctive sound of approaching hoofbeats. Her heart raced as she extinguished the fire and took up position by the window, rifle ready. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could make out a lone rider approaching slowly, head bowed against the downpour. Lillian raised the rifle, finger resting lightly on the trigger. The rider drew closer, entering the small clearing before the cabin. Lightning flashed, illuminating the scene in stark white light. The breath caught in her throat as she recognized the broad-shouldered silhouette, the distinctive way he sat a horse, even when drenched and weary. Samuel. She lowered the rifle and rushed to the door, throwing it open despite the driving rain. Samuel dismounted stiffly, leading his horse toward the shelter of the lean-to. When he saw her, framed in the doorway, his exhausted face transformed with relief. "You made it," he said simply, his voice barely audible above the storm. "And you followed," she replied, unable to keep the joy from her voice. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Once inside, Samuel sank onto the cabin's single chair, water streaming from his duster and hat. In the glow of the rekindled fire, Lillian could see the toll the past day had taken. A fresh bullet graze along his left arm, dark circles beneath his eyes, the bone-deep weariness in every movement. "Slate?" she asked, finding clean rags in a drawer to bind his wound. "Two of his men won't be troubling anyone again," Samuel replied grimly. "Slate himself took a bullet in the shoulder, but was still riding when I broke away. He's determined. I'll give him that. He'll follow us to Riverton." Samuel nodded, wincing slightly as she cleaned his wound. "Without doubt, the colonel will have men waiting there too, once Slate gets word to him." He glanced at the lockbox on the table. "Evidence safe?" "Untouched," Lillian assured him. "I've been studying it. The journal alone contains enough to bring down half the territorial government." Good. Samuel's eyes were heavy-lidded with exhaustion. We'll need to leave at first light. Take an alternate route to Riverton. There's a settlement called Cooper's Crossing about 10 miles east of here. Small, just a trading post and a few homesteads, but they have a telegraph line. Do you trust the telegraph operator there? Don't know him, but we don't need to trust him, just need him to send our wire before the syndicate learns we're there. Lillian finished bandaging his arm. The bullet had only grazed him, but the wound was angry and red. Without proper medical attention, infection was a risk. Yet another reason to reach civilization quickly. You should rest, she said, stepping back from her ministrations. I'll keep watch first. Samuel seemed about to object, then nodded, acknowledging his limits. Wake me in 4 hours. We'll need to move while it's still dark. He stretched out on the rough bunk, not bothering to remove his boots or gun belt. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into sleep. Lillian watched him for a moment, this complex man who had become her unlikely ally against formidable enemies. She settled by the window with the rifle across her lap, alert to any sound beyond the diminishing storm. The rain had slackened to a gentle patter, and occasional stars were visible through breaks in the clouds. As she maintained her vigil, Lillian reflected on the strange path that had led her here. She had fled Philadelphia believing herself ruined, her life effectively over. Yet, in the crucible of danger and hardship, she had discovered a strength within herself she hadn't known existed. The frightened governess, who had pulled a trigger in desperate self-defense that night in Prescott's study, seemed like a different person now, a shadow from someone else's past. The woman who had ridden through hostile terrain with vital evidence, who had faced armed men without flinching, who now kept watch while a former marshal slept, this was who she truly was. Outside the cabin's walls, the storm passed completely, revealing a sky brilliant with stars. Lillian gazed up at their distant light, feeling small yet significant against the vastness of the territory and the corruption they sought to expose. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new challenges, but for the first time in months, Lillian faced the future not with dread, but with purpose. Whatever awaited them in Cooper's Crossing or beyond, she would meet it head-on, no longer running. From her past but racing toward justice, with a silent gunslinger who had recognized her true self when no one else could. The pre-dawn light painted the eastern horizon in shades of purple and gray, as Lillian and Samuel rode out from the line cabin. They traveled in silence, each lost in private thoughts, the gravity of their mission hanging between them like an unspoken prayer. The route Samuel had chosen would keep them away from the main trails, following game paths and dry creek beds where their tracks would be harder to follow. "Tell me about Cooper's Crossing," Lillian said as the sun finally crested. The mountains, bathing the landscape in golden light. What can we expect there? Samuel scanned the terrain ahead, ever vigilant. Not much. Trading post run by an old mountain man named Ezekiel Cooper. A blacksmith shop. Maybe a dozen homesteads scattered nearby. No sheriff, no jail. People there. Handle their own troubles. Is that good or bad for us? Both, he replied. No law means no one to arrest us if Slate sent telegrams about wanted fugitives, but it also means no protection if the syndicate's men find us there. They rode steadily through the morning, pushing their horses as much as they dared on the difficult terrain. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking a small valley. Below, a cluster of buildings huddled along a creek. Cooper's Crossing. Looks quiet, Lillian observed, surveying the settlement through Samuel's spyglass. I don't see many people about. That's normal for a place this size. Most folks are working their land during the day. Samuel adjusted his hat against the sun. The trading post is that larger building with the wagon out front. Telegraph office should be inside. We shouldn't approach together, Lillian decided, surprising herself with her tactical thinking. If they're watching for a man and woman traveling together, that would confirm we're the ones they're after. Samuel nodded, impressed by her reasoning. I'll go in first, check for any signs of trouble. If it's clear, I'll come out and water my horse at the trough. That'll be your signal to approach. And if there is trouble? His expression hardened. Then I'll find another way to signal you. Either way, if I'm not out in 15 minutes, take the evidence and ride east toward the territorial border. There's a marshal's office in Cimarron you can reach in 2 days. Lillian wanted to protest, to insist they stay together, but she understood the logic. The evidence was what mattered. Their lives were secondary to exposing the syndicate's crimes. They separated at the outskirts of the settlement, Samuel riding openly down the main street, while Lillian circled around to approach from the east. She found a position behind an abandoned barn that gave her a clear view of the trading post, and settled in to wait, the lockbox secure in her saddlebag. Samuel dismounted before the trading post with the casual confidence of a man with nothing to hide. He looped his horse's reins around the hitching post and climbed the steps to the porch, spurs jingling softly. Before entering, he surveyed the street with practiced nonchalance, noting positions and potential threats. From her vantage point, Lillian counted the minutes, her hand resting on the rifle across her lap. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Her anxiety grew with each passing moment. Just as she was about to abandon her position, the trading post door opened and Samuel emerged. He moved to his horse and untied it, leading the animal to the water trough as agreed. Relief flooded through. Lillian, the signal was clear. It was safe to approach. She mounted and rode into town, maintaining the appearance of a traveler arriving independently. As she approached the trading post, Samuel was examining his horse's foreleg, providing a reason for his continued presence. "Anything," she murmured, as she dismounted nearby. "All clear inside," he replied quietly. "Telegraph operator is Cooper himself. Old man with a wild beard. No one else in the store but his granddaughter." Lillian nodded and ascended the porch steps. The trading post was dimly lit, its interior crammed with merchandise ranging from basic supplies to oddities collected over decades. Behind a cluttered counter stood a man who could only be Ezekiel Cooper, ancient, with a magnificent white beard that reached nearly to his waist, eyes sharp in a face weathered by sun and wind. "Good day," Lillian greeted him pleasantly. "I understand you operate a telegraph?" Cooper scrutinized her with undisguised curiosity. "That I do, miss. Not many ladies come through here needing to send wires. Who might you be sending to?" "The U.S. Marshal's office in Denver," she replied, seeing no benefit in deception. "It's quite urgent." Something in Cooper's expression shifted, a wariness entering his keen eyes. "Marshal's office, you say? You in some kind of trouble, miss?" Before Lillian could respond, the door opened behind her. She tensed, expecting trouble, but it was only Samuel entering the store. Cooper's attention immediately shifted to the newcomer, his wariness increasing visibly. "Two of you, eh?" he said, reaching beneath the counter where Lillian suspected a shotgun was kept. "Funny thing, had a wire come through this morning asking folks to keep an eye out for a man and woman traveling together. Said they were dangerous fugitives." His hand remained hidden below the counter. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" The atmosphere in the store crystallized into dangerous stillness. At the back of the room, a young woman, Cooper's granddaughter presumably, froze in the act of stocking shelves, sensing the tension. Samuel stepped forward slowly, hands carefully visible. "Mr. Cooper, my name is Samuel Reed. I was a U.S. Marshal for 7 years. The wire you received came from men working for a criminal organization called the Syndicate." Cooper's bushy eyebrows rose skeptically. "That so? Wire came from the..." Sheriff in Riverton. Said you killed 2 men in Blackwater Gulch. That sheriff is on the syndicate's payroll, Samuel replied steadily. As are judges, bankers, and politicians throughout the territory. We have evidence of their operations, evidence they've already killed to suppress. Cooper snorted. Everyone who comes through that door has a story, mister. Why should I believe yours over an official telegraph from a sheriff? Lillian stepped forward. Because we're asking you to help us contact the federal authorities, Mr. Cooper. If we were truly criminals, would we seek the involvement of U.S. Marshals? The old man considered this, his hand still beneath the counter. What's this evidence you claim to have? Samuel and Lillian exchanged glances. They needed Cooper's cooperation, which meant trusting him with at least some of the truth. Financial records, Samuel said. Correspondence between syndicate members, photographic evidence of criminal activity, enough to prove that a network of corrupt officials and businessmen have been defrauding investors and stealing federal shipments of gold and silver. Cooper's granddaughter stepped forward. Grandfather, let them send their wire. What harm could it do? The old man's eyes narrowed as he weighed his options. Finally, he withdrew his hand from beneath the counter. Empty, Lillian noted with relief. Telegraph is in the back room, he said gruffly. $3 to send a message to Denver. I don't care what your business is, long as you pay and don't bring trouble to my door. Thank you, Lillian said with genuine gratitude. You're doing the right thing. Cooper led them to a small room behind the store where the telegraph equipment sat on a desk beside a window overlooking the creek. Write your message here, he said, pushing a pad of paper toward them. Keep it brief. Expensive to send long. Wires. Samuel drafted the message quickly. To U.S. Marshal James Harker, Denver office, urgent. Have evidence of syndicate criminal operations throughout territory. James Blackwood murdered to suppress same. Being pursued by syndicate agents. Will proceed to Cimarron office. Require immediate assistance. Samuel Reed, former U.S. Marshal. Cooper read it with raised eyebrows, but made no comment as he began tapping out the message on his telegraph key. The clicking sound seemed impossibly loud in the small room, each tap potentially alerting the syndicate to their location and plans. When Cooper finished, he turned to them. That's done. Answer might come through soon or might be hours. You're welcome to wait, but not inside. Bad for business having fugitives about, whether you're innocent or not. We understand, Samuel said, placing $3 silver on the desk. Is there somewhere nearby we could rest our horses? We've ridden hard today. Cooper's granddaughter, who had followed them into the telegraph room, spoke up. There's a livery stable just down the street. Old man Jenkins won't ask questions, if you pay in advance. They thanked her and left the trading post, both scanning the street for any sign of danger. Cooper's crossing remained quiet, only a few locals going about their business, none paying them particular attention. The livery stable was as described, a weathered structure with a corral attached and an elderly proprietor who indeed asked no questions when Samuel offered payment for stabling their horses. They found a place in the stable's hayloft where they could rest while maintaining a view of the approach to the trading post. How long before the marshals could reach us? Lillian asked, as they settled into their temporary refuge. If Harker dispatches men immediately, 2 days at the earliest, Samuel replied. But that's assuming the telegraph goes through cleanly and isn't intercepted. Do you trust this Harker? Could he be part of the syndicate too? Samuel shook his head. James Harker and I served together. He's as honest as they come, but he might not be in the office to receive the wire, or the syndicate might have men watching the marshal's office, intercepting communications. So we proceed to Cimarron as planned? Yes, but carefully. Slate and his men could be close behind us, and once that telegraph goes out, the syndicate will know our intended route. They fell silent, each contemplating the dangers ahead. The hayloft was warm, the scent of dried grass and horses strangely comforting. After the tension of the past days, the peaceful interlude felt almost unreal. "Tell me about your brother," Lillian said suddenly, drawn to know more about the man, whose evidence they carried. "What was he like, beyond what you've already shared?" Samuel leaned back against a hay bale, his expression softening. "James was the better of us in most ways, smarter, more patient. He could see the good in people where I only saw threats." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "When we were boys, I was always getting into fights, while James was the one talking me out of them. Yet he became a miner and you a lawman. That seems the opposite of what you'd expect." "Maybe, but James loved solving puzzles, understanding how things worked. Mining satisfied that part of him, the challenge of finding wealth hidden in rock." Samuel's gaze grew distant. "And I needed structure, rules. The marshal's badge gave me that for a time." "Why did you leave the service?" Lillian asked, sensing they were approaching something significant. Samuel was silent so long she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low, controlled. "There was a situation, a wanted man who'd taken hostages. I was ordered to wait for reinforcements, follow procedure, but there was a child involved." His jaw tightened. "I went in alone. The hostages lived, the fugitive didn't, and neither did my career as a marshal." "They dismissed you for saving lives?" "They dismissed me for disobeying direct orders, for being, as my superior put it, a law unto myself." The bitterness in his voice was evident despite his control. "After that, I turned to bounty hunting. At least there I knew the rules. Bring them in, dead or alive. Get paid." Lillian considered his words carefully, and yet here you are, risking your life to uphold the law, to expose corruption within the very system that rejected you. Samuel met her gaze, something vulnerable briefly visible in his eyes. "Justice and the law aren't always the same thing. Elizabeth, I've learned that the hard way, but justice for James, that matters to me." The use of her real name stirred something in Lillian's chest, not fear as it once had, but a sense of being truly seen. In Cooper's Crossing, on the run with a price on both their heads, she was not Lillian Crawford, the mail-order bride, nor Miss Harrington, the governess, but Elizabeth, a woman defined not by her past mistakes or the expectations of others, but by her own courage and convictions. "And what of you?" Samuel asked, turning the conversation. "When this is over, if we succeed in exposing the syndicate and clearing your name, what then? Will you return east?" Elizabeth considered the question. "No," she said, finally. "There's nothing for me there now. Perhaps San Francisco, as you suggested, or further north." She smiled slightly. "I've heard Washington Territory is beautiful and progressive in its views on women's rights." "You could still be a bride," Samuel observed. "Find a good man, someone worthy of you." "Perhaps someday," she replied carefully. "But I've learned something important on this journey. I don't need a husband to define my worth or secure my future. Whether I marry or not will be my choice, made from strength rather than necessity." Samuel nodded, respect evident in his expression. A hard-won wisdom. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching riders, several horses moving at a steady trot into town. Samuel moved quickly to the hayloft window, Lillian joining him to peer cautiously at the street below. 4 men rode past, the livery, heading toward the trading post. Even from behind, the broad-shouldered figure in the lead was unmistakable. Victor Slate. "They've found us," Lillian whispered, her hand instinctively moving to the revolver at her side. Samuel's expression hardened into the cold mask of the gunslinger. "They're heading for Cooper's. The telegraph must have been intercepted." He checked his weapons with practiced efficiency. "We need to warn the old man. He doesn't deserve to die for helping us." "And the evidence? We can't risk losing it." Samuel considered briefly. "Take it. There's a back exit from the livery that leads to the creek. Follow it east for about a mile, then cut north into the foothills. Wait for me at the lightning-struck pine on the ridge. You'll see it clearly against the skyline. And if you don't come, then ride for Cimarron as we discussed." His eyes held hers intently. "But I'll be there." Elizabeth wanted to protest, to insist they stay together, but she recognized the necessity of his plan. She quickly gathered their few belongings, securing the precious lockbox in her saddlebag. "Be careful," she said, an inadequate expression of the emotion swelling in her chest. Samuel's hand brushed hers briefly, the touch conveying what words could not. "Always am." They descended from the hayloft, Samuel moving toward the stable's front entrance, while Elizabeth led her horse toward the rear exit. As she mounted, she glanced back to see Samuel already gone, slipping between buildings toward the trading post where danger waited. Elizabeth rode carefully along the creek as instructed, keeping to the tree line to avoid being spotted. The water gurgled peacefully over stones, a serene counterpoint to the tension gripping her body. 1 mile stretched into 2 as she followed, the meandering watercourse constantly scanning for the lightning-struck pine that would mark her waiting place. Finally, she spotted it. A massive ponderosa, its top shattered by some long-ago storm, standing solitary on the ridge like a sentinel. She guided her horse up the slope, finding a position among a cluster of boulders that offered both concealment and a view of the approach from Cooper's Crossing. Time passed with excruciating slowness. The sun began its descent toward the western mountains, shadows lengthening across the valley. No sign of Samuel, no sign of pursuit, just the endless waiting imagination conjuring the worst possibilities. Had Slate and his men killed Samuel? Was Cooper dead as well for helping them? Had the telegraph to Denver been sent, or had the message been intercepted, replaced with false information to lure U.S. Marshals into a trap? As twilight gathered, Elizabeth made a difficult decision. She could not wait indefinitely. The evidence she carried was too important to risk in a futile vigil. With a heavy heart, she prepared to continue alone to Cimarron, praying Samuel would find his own way there. Just as she mounted, movement caught her eye. A lone rider approaching from the direction of Cooper's Crossing, moving at a steady lope. She raised her rifle, squinting through the failing light to identify the distant figure. The rider's posture, the set of his shoulders. Even at a distance, she recognized Samuel. Relief flooded through her, so intense it was almost painful. She guided her horse down to meet him, throwing caution aside in her eagerness to confirm he was truly alive. As they drew closer, she saw blood darkening the left side of his duster. His face was grim, lined with pain and something else, a haunted look she hadn't seen before. "You're hurt," she said as they met, reaching toward his injured side. Samuel waved off her concern. "Bullet grazed my ribs, nothing serious." His voice was clipped, emotionless. "We need to move. They won't be far behind." Cooper, his granddaughter, safe. The single word carried a weight that told Elizabeth more had happened than he was saying. "I got there in time to warn them. They're hiding with neighbors until it's safe to return." "And Slate?" Samuel's expression turned to granite. "Won't be bothering anyone again, nor will 2 of his men." He met her gaze directly. "But there were 6 altogether. The others will be coming. We need to reach Cimarron before they catch up." They rode through the night, pushing their horses as hard as they dared in the darkness. Samuel led them on game trails and ancient Indian paths, routes that would be difficult to follow, even for experienced trackers. They spoke little, conserving energy, each lost in private thoughts. Dawn found them in high country. the trail winding through a landscape of twisted pine and dramatic rock formations. They paused briefly to rest the horses and dress Samuel's wound properly. The bullet had indeed only grazed him, but the gash was ugly and beginning to show signs of infection. "What happened at Cooper's?" Elizabeth asked as she cleaned the wound with water from her canteen. The full story this time. Samuel winced as she worked but didn't pull away. Slate was questioning Cooper when I arrived. Roughly. The old man wasn't talking, but they were threatening his granddaughter. His voice grew distant. "I've seen that scene too many times. Innocent people hurt because they crossed paths with the wrong sort. So you intervened." "I did what was necessary." His tone discouraged further questions on the matter. "Cooper had managed to send our telegraph before they arrived. We'll know when we reach Cimarron if help is coming." They rode on as the sun climbed higher, following a route that gradually descended from the mountains toward more hospitable terrain. According to Samuel, they were now less than a day's ride from Cimarron, if they could maintain their pace, and avoid further confrontation. By mid-afternoon, they reached a plateau overlooking a broad valley. In the distance, the silver ribbon of a river wound through the landscape, and beside it, barely visible, the buildings of what must be Cimarron. "We've made better time than I expected," Samuel said, satisfaction evident in his voice despite his obvious fatigue. "We should reach town by nightfall." Just as hope began to rise in Elizabeth's heart, the sound of a rifle shot shattered the moment. The bullet kicked up dirt inches from her horse's hooves, causing the animal to rear in panic. She struggled to maintain control as Samuel drew his revolver, scanning the surrounding terrain for the shooter. "There!" he shouted, pointing to a rocky outcropping to their right. 3 riders! The remaining men from Slate's gang had caught up to them, using the high ground to their advantage. Another shot rang out, this one passing close enough that Elizabeth felt the displacement of air against her cheek. "The ravine!" Samuel urged, indicating a steep-sided gully to their left. "It leads down to the valley. Go! I'll cover you!" Elizabeth hesitated only briefly before spurring her horse toward the ravine entrance. Behind her, Samuel fired repeatedly at the outcropping, forcing the pursuers to take cover. The descent was treacherous. A narrow path down the ravine wall, loose stones shifting beneath her horse's hooves. Elizabeth leaned back in the saddle, giving the animal its head, trusting it to find secure footing. Above, the exchange of gunfire continued. She reached the bottom of the ravine and looked back up the trail. Samuel was still at the top, firing methodically at their pursuers. As she watched, he turned his horse and began the descent, still firing occasionally to keep the enemy pinned down. Halfway down, disaster struck. A stone gave way beneath his horse's foreleg, sending the animal lurching sideways. Samuel tried to correct, but the slope was too steep, the footing too uncertain. Horse and rider went down, tumbling in a chaos of dust and flailing limbs. "Samuel!" Elizabeth cried, watching in horror as they slid to a stop on a small ledge partway down the ravine wall. The horse struggled to its feet, apparently injured but alive. Samuel did not move. Without hesitation, Elizabeth dismounted and scrambled up the slope toward him. Gunfire from above forced her to press against the ravine wall for cover, but she continued climbing, driven by a fear more powerful than self-preservation. When she reached him, Samuel was unconscious, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. His left arm lay at an unnatural angle, clearly broken, but he was breathing, and when she pressed her fingers to his neck, his pulse was strong. "Samuel!" she called urgently, patting his cheek. "Samuel, wake up! We have to move!" His eyelids fluttered, then opened. Confusion clouded his gaze momentarily, before clarity returned. "Elizabeth," he muttered, "the shooters." "Still up top," she replied, glancing nervously upward. "But they'll find a way down soon. Can you stand?" With her help, Samuel managed to get to his feet, swaying dangerously on the narrow ledge. His left arm hung useless at his side, and he leaned heavily against her. "My horse?" he asked through gritted teeth. "Down there, injured but standing. We'll have to share mine." She looked him in the eyes. "Can you make it down the rest of the way?" Samuel's jaw tightened with determination. "Lead on." The descent was agonizing, each step jarring Samuel's broken arm, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. Elizabeth supported him as best she could, her own muscles screaming with the effort of preventing them both from falling. They reached the bottom of the ravine as shouts from above indicated their pursuers had found a way down, no time to rest. Elizabeth helped Samuel onto her horse, then mounted behind him, supporting his injured body with her own. "The evidence?" Samuel said suddenly, his voice tight with pain. "You still have it?" "Safe in the saddlebag," she assured him, urging the horse into motion. "Just stay with me. Cimarron isn't far now." They galloped down the ravine, the walls gradually lowering until they opened onto the valley they had seen from above. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew more distant, their pursuers slowed by the difficult descent. As the sun touched the western mountains, casting long shadows across the land, the buildings of Cimarron grew closer. Elizabeth could make out the main street, the church steeple, and most importantly, the building flying the U.S. flag, the marshal's office. Samuel had fallen silent, his body growing heavier against her. His breathing was labored, his skin hot with developing fever. The combination of his earlier wound, the new injuries, and days of hard riding had pushed him beyond human endurance. "Just a little further," she encouraged, though unsure if he could hear her. "Hold on, Samuel, please hold on." The streets of Cimarron were quiet as they entered town, a few locals staring in surprise at the exhausted woman supporting an injured man on a lathered horse. Elizabeth rode directly to the marshal's office, her heart pounding with hope and fear. As she reined to a stop before the building, the door opened. A tall man with a silver star on his vest stepped out, hand resting casually on his holstered revolver. "U.S. Marshal's office," he announced. "State your business." Elizabeth straightened, summoning her last reserves of strength and dignity. "My name is Elizabeth Harrington. This is Samuel Reed, former U.S. Marshal. We have evidence of a criminal conspiracy operating throughout the territory. We sent a telegraph from Cooper's Crossing." The marshal's expression shifted from wary to alert. "Reed, Sam Reed." He moved closer, examining the injured man. "By God, it is you. Harker said you might be coming." He called over his shoulder, "Jenkins, get the doctor." Strong hands helped lift Samuel from the horse. As they carried him into the office, his eyes opened briefly, finding Elizabeth's face. "We made it," she told him, tears of relief threatening to spill. "The evidence is safe. It's over." A ghost of a smile touched Samuel's lips before his eyes closed again. The marshal guided Elizabeth inside, where they laid Samuel on a cot in the corner. "You're safe now, Miss Harrington," the marshal assured her. "We received the wire from Denver this morning. Marshal Harker dispatched a full complement of deputies. They're already on their way." Elizabeth sank into a chair, the lockbox clutched in her hands. After so many days of running, of fighting, of fearing they would fail, they had succeeded. The evidence would reach the proper authorities. The syndicate would be exposed. Justice for James Blackwood, and for her, was finally within reach. As the doctor arrived to tend to Samuel's injuries, Elizabeth allowed herself to contemplate the future she had glimpsed during their journey, not as a fugitive, not as a mail-order bride seeking protection, but as a woman standing on her own strength. A woman who had faced unimaginable dangers and emerged victorious. And perhaps, she thought as she watched Samuel's face relax into genuine rest for the first time since she'd known him, that future might include a silent gunslinger who had seen her true self when no one else could. The journey wasn't over. There would be trials, testimony, the inevitable resistance of powerful men facing justice. But in that moment, in the safety of the marshal's office with the precious evidence secure, Elizabeth knew, with unshakable certainty, that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them not with fear, but with the newfound courage that had awakened in the ghost town of Blackwater Gulch. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.